One and only. It was hard to control her heartbeat. Eragon was on his way to the treehouse as she felt their world changing forever. Fernan approached the balcony where she was breathing the night air. He raised his head so she could face him. No words were exchanged, but Arya felt his affection surrounding her through their bond, and at once her heart calmed down inside her chest. He touched her forehead very lightly with his nose and retreated to his shelter. Not long after, Saphira appeared gliding over the Edda River, circling the Tealdari Hill until she landed on the grass in front of the treehouse. Arya took a deep breath and went inside the bedroom, where she listened to the front door being opened, then locked. His steps on the stairwell were light but rhythmic. His image when he emerged in the room was all she needed to put her anxiety to rest finally. Eragon was apprehensive but warm as always. In his right hand, he carried the bag with his belongings. She smiled to see that. He dropped the bag on the floor as she approached him. His eyes never left hers, and she suspected he was looking for something in particular that she did not quite know what it was. Maybe security, confidence, affection. Arya made sure to give it all to him. Her swift fingers untied his cape and let it fall to the ground. Next, it was his belt. Or at least she tried. Eragon chuckled at her frustration, to realize it was enchanted. The corners of his eyes creased in that charming way she adored. Only his hands were allowed to unbuckle his belt, so he did. Then she proceeded to unbutton his fine northerner vest from top down slowly, caressing his chest over the fabric, never ceasing their eye contact. His breathing quickened when she removed the piece of clothing and let it rest with his cape and belt. Her hands glided over his torso, making him close his eyes to savor every touch of her fingers. She reached to the hem of his tunic and pulled it up. He raised his arms to let her slide the cloth off him. Arya scratched his chest, feeling the lines of his muscles under the thin layer of hair. She watched as the corners of his lips slightly pulled upward, meaning he was ticklish. She smiled and stepped back, admiring his figure. Handsome and alluring, like no one else. During dinner in the mountain, Arya distracted herself from her anxiety with a serious conversation with Nasuada. The human, as Arya noticed, wished to hide her pregnancy by talking about the next political moves her kingdom and the elves should take together, considering the advances made by the army of magicians. Discussing the near future was fruitless if she was going to be occupied with a more important matter. Arya never implied she knew about it. To her left, Eragon's seat was empty because he chose to spend time with Murtog, Roran, and the rest of his family. She looked in his direction at the table in front of hers. It was as if he had sensed her eyes grazing on the back of his head. He turned to her and gave her a warm smile. Her stomach flipped with anticipation. Arya took his hand and guided him to the bed where he sat on its edge, where he kicked his boots away. She stood in front of him between his legs and ran her fingers through his soft brown hair. She thought at that moment that of all the things she loved about him, his hair was something she would have never considered being so enticing before. She loved the way it felt between her fingers. After taking her time massaging his scalp for both of their pleasure, she rested her hands on his shoulders and brushed her lips on his forehead, feeling his breath on her chest. She caressed his brow and eyelids with the soft touch of her lips, went down his nose until his mouth. With her left hand, she lifted his chin and placed the softest kiss on his closed lips. So light he could have mistaken it for a puff of air. Then she decided to draw the contours of his lips with her tongue, tasting his pinky skin. Arya could spend the rest of her life savoring his taste and texture, bathing in his smell of wet grass and rain. Eragon parted his lips to receive the deep kiss he was hoping for, but with a mischievous smile, she backed away, breaking their contact. He let out a protesting groan and opened his eyes. Never stopping to smile, she closed the distance again just to place a kiss on the corner of his mouth, before trailing her way on his jaw to his right ear, feeling his stubble prick her lips, but in a pleasant manner. He closed his eyes again to enjoy her torturous caresses. In his ear, she whispered, "Has anyone ever touched you tender like this? Eragon." She waited like that for a while before turning to see his face. He had a pained expression, and she regretted asking that. Eragon shook his head, to what she said with all the affection and care a person could carry. "It's all right, my rider. I am here now." She kissed his lips, his neck, his chest and stomach. All the while her fingernails traced a path on his arms, biceps, the inside of his elbows and forearms. When their hands met, she was on her knees before him. Looking up to him, she saw his expectations rise. She united their hands and kissed first his knuckles, and then his palms, slowly, teasingly. After that, he raised his hands to cup her face. The look in his eyes was breathtaking for Arya. How could someone show so much of themselves with only a look? Right there he was bare in front of her. All his doubts and apprehension, all his fragility and all his adoration. But all his strength too. They were all laying down for her to see. Right there, she could not feel more desired. He made her feel invincible, as she was the most important being in the world. There was no bigger flattery than that. Arya stood up and with a quick movement, she took off her tunic, letting it rest on the floor. Her exposed torso caught his eyes, and she watched as his chest started to move up and down fast from the shallow breaths he was taking. He was hyperventilating with the sight of her naked breasts. A perverse satisfaction ran through her head, but it was suppressed quickly. She would not allow herself to be so vain on his expenses. Arya stepped forward and cradled his head to her chest, which made him even more nervous. "Breathe, Eragon. Breathe." It took him several seconds for him to start doing as she commanded, but once he did, she felt him relax under her grasp. Slowly, his hands were gliding up on her thighs and bottom, where he grabbed her at the same time he looked up to see her face. His ability to change expressions never failed to surprise her, so her heart skipped a beat when she saw raw desire burning in his eyes. The most appealing shade of pink colored his cheeks, and Arya thought her legs would crumble under the weight of her wonderment for the way he looked. Without diverting his gaze, he kissed her between her breasts, her stomach and down her belly, creating a tingling sensation where he touched. She felt how much she wanted him, and how big her urgency was as his fingers hooked the waistband of her pants before pulling it down and making her step out of it. His breath traced a fiery pathway down her skin between her legs, and there was nothing left for her to do but to dig her nails on his scalp and throw her head back at the notion that he was tasting her so intimately. Arya did not remember ever feeling like that with Fairlin, the only lover she had ever had before Eragon. With him, it had always felt ethereal, immaterial somehow, like a link of ideas rather than bodies. She could not say there wasn't pleasure. Of course there was, but with the elf, she had never felt she would burn away if he didn't touch her where Eragon was touching her, or he didn't place his lips and tongue where Eragon was placing his. And that was the moment she knew she would be forever loyal to Eragon. There was no escape. Not because of the physical sensation he was giving her, but the way he made her lose herself just to be found again. It was the way he would love her even before she could even love herself. The fact that he accepted her in a way she could never accept herself. But above all, it was the way she wanted to do for him all that he did for her. She became completely devoted to making them the best versions of themselves. Every movement he made intending to pleasure her, then pick her up and place her on the bed, was a step closer to the commitment she was willing to take throughout their lives. When he weighed on her and moved his hands to finish undressing, she was sure she would follow him into the cruelest battles life was planning for him. And feeling him on her, in her and all around her, only created a bond she could never understand. Neither she wanted to. Feeling him in her was almost too much. It was almost as if her body wasn't hers anymore, it was his, but at the same time, She had never felt as owner of herself as in that instant. It was confusing, but enlightening. It was doom and redemption, all in one. Eragon and Arya were practically the same size in height. Once she heard someone whispering to his fellow soldier after a battle that together they looked like twin shadows, slaughtering their way to the king. Indeed. She would normally see him eye to eye, but at that moment he was a giant, occupying all the extension of her bed and mind. Wherever she thought of moving to, he was. In her haze, it took her a few instants to realize that she was the one looking for him. Her hands would travel from the back of his head to the lowest of his back, all over his thighs. His arms were already branded by her iron claws. If he was the giant, she was making no effort to escape him. It was curious for Arya to notice that her guidance in their relationship consisted of taking the first steps, because Eragon could pick up the pace of their complex dance, as he was born for it. On top of her, he was the master of her pleasure, by the way he tasted her honey skin in all her corners and lines. Her body arched when she felt his teeth grazing on her nipples, neck, and earlobe. She could not stop her nails from digging on his firm arms or back. Inside their embrace, Arya stopped the kiss he was laying on her neck to bring him to look in her eyes. She wanted to see what pleasure looked like for him. She bucked her hips up and ripped a groan from his lips as her own pleasure built up inside of her. They stared at each other as he intensified the rhythm of his thrusts. It was like looking in the mirror. His love was hers, and her devotion was his. She met his thrusts with more passion as they stared at each other. It was almost too much for her, heartbeats like drums, whimpering like strings, moans like sensual chords pushing the dancer like lovers to increase the intensity of their movements. They would meet each other and break apart, just to reunite again. The air that came out of her lungs filled his own. The sweat that damped her hair fell from his forehead. And nothing in the entire world could have prevented the partners to lock each other in the most intimate dance, until finally, the grip of her walls around him pushed him to the edge, and his final move made her convulse in the most primitive and fundamental pleasure. Their final step made the music slow down and fade in the face of destiny, predicted by more than one prophecy. She knew at that moment that they were bound to each other, no matter time or space, or what others had to speak about it. They were all that mattered. Still panting, they lay on the bed, side by side, until she turned to her right side to face him. His pale skin was glistening under the faint candlelight as his chest moved up and down to follow his breaths. Arya would never forget that moment. She would never forget him. His eyes met hers. They smiled at the same time, and for some reason they laughed together, as it seemed funny to them that after all they had been through they ended up there, sharing a bed, a house, their intimacy. She reached his chest with her left hand, and like that they both fell into their sea of dreams, softly allowing each other entrance, like old friends, that indeed they were. They stayed in the same position, roaming around each other's dreams until the first rays of sun came through the balcony and all the windows. Arya opened her eyes very lazily as she stroked Eragon's chest hair. She watched as he wandered through the realm of his waking dreams. They were peaceful, as she attested from walking inside his mind. He looked calm and content. But that wasn't exactly the way she felt. Even though the night before had been the best she had in a very long time, if not ever, and satisfaction ran through her entire body, Arya worried that their lives from that point on would be terribly difficult. His pleads for her to stay in Anga and her resentment of him for not coming back to Alagaezia, allied to the judgment of her counselors, would be taken to a painful level beyond tolerable. It was certain that the word of their union would spread like wildfire. People would know she would be in danger. Eragon could be accused of favoring the elves. Despite all, she knew she would be loyal. How much pain she would be able to take under this resolution. How about him? Was she willing to see him suffer when their next goodbye was said? She knew not. But of one thing she was completely sure: he was very much worth it. Fearing he could sense her troublesome line of thought, she retreated from his mind after mentally speaking rest. "I won't be gone long." He stirred but did not wake or replied. Placing a soft kiss on his cheek, she got out of bed. Arya grabbed a change of clothes and went to the washroom to take a bath and make sense of all that had happened. From peaceful images of an afternoon in the sun, Eragon's waking dreams turned to a terrible succession of bloody faces and red mists on the battlefield. He remembered those faces. They were the men he had slaughtered mercilessly on his way to defeat Galbatorix. Their eyes pierced his soul, leaving him hollow inside. He watched as his feet marched and sunk in the soaked terrain. Soaked with blood. But not his. Never his. Pain and guilt consumed him, so he forced himself to shake away those thoughts and wake up brusquely. Eragon sat up fast on Arya's bed, feeling anxious and panting uncontrollably. The sheets that covered his torso fell to his lap. He felt his heart clenching, and his breathing became shortened. His eyes couldn't see clearly anymore, despite the sunlight entering through the windows, for tears clouded his vision. Eragon tried to touch Saphira's mind and found her too deep in her sleep to hear him. Alone and anxious, he felt a dull pain in his chest as the thought of all those people slain by his own hands haunted his mind. His breaths ended up coming in sobs. His hands were cold. Just when he thought he was on the verge of passing out or throwing up, he felt a pair of warm hands clasping his face on both sides and a nervous voice calling his name. Eragon. "What's wrong?" Eragon. He blinked twice until he could recognize Arya's worried face staring at him. She was kneeling on the bed in front of him. Her hair was wet from bathing. "Breathe. Breathe." Eragon tried to take a deep breath, but only managed to inhale a small portion of air. He did it again. This time her smell brought him up to his senses. The third time, he was completely able to fill his lungs to their full capacity. Letting the air out slowly, he closed his eyes, feeling his heart rate coming down to a normal pace. A tear was squeezed out of his eye and rolled down his cheek. Arya brushed her thumbs on his cheeks, wiping the tear away, and called him once again, in a softer voice. He opened his eyes and looked at her. "What happened?" she questioned in his familiar language. He took another deep breath. "I just remembered things." "It happens sometimes." "I'm fine." Switching to the ancient language, she asked again. "Eragon, what happened?" "What did you see?" "I'm F." The word got lost in his throat. He couldn't say it because it was not true. He thought about their night together instead, and that helped him get the words out. "I'm fine." She raised a brow, noticing his stratagem. "All right. You don't have to tell me. But you will confide in me if you need help, right?" It was not a request, so he felt compelled to obey her. But she didn't have to tell him that. He would gladly come to her in a moment of need. He just needed a little bit of time to process his feelings. Sure. He got his arms around her waist and brought her to him. She settled herself inside his embrace, with her back pressed against his chest. Arya waited patiently for his next words. "I made little to no progress at all in taming my dreams. Every time I sit to meditate and work on my problems, I keep remembering darker times. I believe my mind twists the memories to make them even worse. It's like a perverse self-punishment." He wanted to look in her eyes to watch her reaction, but decided to stay in that position, with his nose breathing her scent directly from her hair and neck. "What did you see?" "Everyone I killed, the ones I can recognize, and many faceless ones. The guilt of all the lives I took is eating me alive. I didn't realize before leaving Alagaezia that I could never escape the things I did. They're following me here." She turned just enough to see his eyes. "It's the price we pay for the causes we believe in. You said once that you are bothered by the past as well. Do you have these thoughts?" "Of killing," she sighed. What kind of heartless person would I be if I didn't? I just try my best to control my emotions. He nodded and buried his face in the crook of her neck. She was better than him in many things. Self-control was only one of them. It wasn't a petty thought to consider this, just an observation. Eragon. Her voice was quiet and warm. Did my absence made it happen? Would it still happen if I were here when you woke up? Eragon lifted his head as Arya turned completely to face him. She straddled him, her hands going behind his neck. Of course you are not the one to blame. You didn't do anything. But I can't doubt that I feel at peace with you here. I felt the touch of your hand on my chest, and it was calming to me. It was like 10 years ago, on the beach. Or when we shared that memory. You came to ease my emotions. I was well then. Eragon leaned his head back a little to see her eyes. I usually have Saphira around to help me. She isolates the thoughts in my mind before we fall asleep, so I don't see them. Does Fernan do that for you too? She started playing with his hair. Sometimes. Especially the most painful memories. I can see him locking it all away, so I won't revisit them in my rest. But only when I can't do it myself. Eragon held an aching expression as he knew what memories she was referring to. How often do you think about that? He asked, unsure if she would respond. Gilead, you mean? He was surprised she mentioned it. With a faint nod, he encouraged her to continue. Every day, at least once. She had a bitter grin. I've told you once I like to torture myself just to see how far I can go, haven't I? Some days are worse than others, but some days are as easy as breathing the fresh air. Her shoulders rose in a shrug. Eragon's eyes widened in shock. Every day. How painful it must be to relive your trauma over and over. Well, he remembered the war every day as well. Sometimes it was the horrible sight of his uncle's body, killed by the Razak. Other days, he would wake up sweating to the image of Arya breaking her thumb to rid herself of the shackles they were put in under Hellgrind. Or Saphira's body, pierced by a magical spear. But the faces of his dead enemies were his most constant company. In a way, he understood what she said and felt bad that she would go through that. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it was this bad. She smiled gently at him and came close to give him a light kiss on the lips. That's because I always thought I didn't need anyone's help. I thought I couldn't trust anyone with my feelings. He was surprised to hear her being so honest about that. Arya wasn't too keen on speaking up about her emotions and flaws. It surprised and humbled him that she would talk about that with him. So why now? Her fingers traced the curve of his neck and went back up to his hair. It tickled him. If I'm willing to shield you from your nightmares, then I need to open up for you to do the same for me. Isn't it fair? Besides, I'm truly committed to you, or wasn't it clear last night? Eragon felt emotion build up in his chest. She was telling him she would protect him from himself, the enemy he never thought he would have, and would let him do the same for her. The certainty of her affection hit him like a wave of the angriest ocean. He nodded, unable to speak, and reached her mouth with his. After the kiss, he went for a hug and tightened his arms around her firmly. Arya enclosed her embrace on his back and caressed his bare skin with her nails. Eragon could find peace in that embrace, despite their troubled minds. It was easy to want to stay there forever, inside her arms under her shelter. You know I'm yours too, don't you? He said with a shaken voice. Arya let out a small laugh. I had a suspicion for quite some time now. But it's good to hear it nonetheless. In her neck, he spoke, and even if the sound came out muffled, he was sure she could hear him. I'm yours and I love you, my queen. Her response was an even tighter embrace and a deep sigh. He didn't need more than that. He could hear her quiets like nobody else.